This is a lesson on how you compare and order fractions. If you take a look at this and you have handy a set of fraction strips, it's pretty easy to compare 1/2 and 1/6. You simply line up the strips and you can see here the size of 1/2 is clearly greater than the size of a fraction that is 1/6. So in this case, it's very easy to see that 1/2 is greater than 1/6. But what do you do when it's not that easy? The first way to look at it is to see if you can use benchmark fractions. Common benchmark fractions for us all to look at are 1/2, 1/4, and 3/4. Those are fractions we come into contact in everyday life with all the time. So if I was going to compare 1/4 and 5/8, I know that 1/4 is less than 1/2 on the number line. That's just something I know. It's intuitive. I've looked at number lines and measuring tapes for a long time, and I know that 1/4 is certainly less than 1/2. If you're thinking pizzas, you know that to be true. I also know that 5/8 is greater than 1/2. Again, I know that if I'm thinking halves and I'm talking about eighths, I know that 1/2 is equivalent to 4/8. And so, oops, I spelled because wrong. And so 4/8, because 5/8 is greater than 4/8, 5/8 is larger than 1/2. So in this case, when I know 1/4 is less than 1/2 and 5/8 is more than 1/2, I can easily say 1/4 is less than 5/8. And again, if you look at this and was looking at this and putting some words around it, Isabella's father's building a model dinosaur with spare pieces of wood that measure 1/4 of an inch and 5/8 of an inch. Which are longer, the 1/4 inch pieces or the 5/8 inch pieces? And again, here I have a number line drawn for you. I have the number line is written in eighths, and you can see that 1/4 is equivalent to 2/8. 1/2, one of our other benchmarks, is equivalent to exactly 4/8. And you see here is 5/8, and here's the 1/4 that we're comparing. So 1/4 inch pieces are definitely less than 5/8 inches, or 5/8 inch pieces are the longer of the two pieces. Okay, so the problem is that this method becomes a lot more difficult when the numbers are not easily benchmarked. In this case, you can always, or in another option, you can always find the lowest common multiple to help you find equivalent fractions with like denominators. So for this example, we're trying to compare 3/5 to 13/15. Neither one of these, 3/5 or 13/15, are common benchmark fractions. So our first step would be to turn these fractions into equivalent fractions with like or similar denominators. So in order to do that, in order to have common denominators, I have to look for the lowest common multiple, the LCM, between 5 and 15. So over here, you see I've listed the multiples of 5, 5, 10, 15, 20. This is where I've gotten the 5. I've listed them here. And then I list the multiples of 15. Those are 15, 30, 45. I circle the common multiple, and even though 30 is also a common multiple, 15 is definitely the lowest common multiple. A shortcut, if you were really familiar with your fractions, is if you're comparing two and you look at the larger denominator, you ask yourselves, is that a multiple of the other? And you could have immediately jumped to, yes, 15 is a multiple of 5. So we would use that as our common denominator. So in looking at this, the LCM becomes our lowest common denominator, and now we make equivalent fractions with 3/5 and 13/15. So in remembering equivalent fractions, the key line is what you do to the top, you do to the bottom. So over here on the board, I have 3/5 and 13/15. I'm changing them to equivalent fractions, both with a denominator of 15. I would ask myself, how many times what do I need to multiply 5 by to get 15? The answer is a times 3. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top, and 3/5 equivalent fraction becomes 9/15. I look at 13/15 exactly stays the same. 15 times 1 is 15. So now I have 3/5 is becoming 9/15 compared to 13/15. With the same denominator, I can easily see that it's 1/2 of the other. Now, you would use this exact same method when ordering fractions. You change all to have a common denominator and order the fractions. In this case, we're asked to order them from least to greatest. So the fractions that I was originally given was 11/12, 1/4, 7/8, and 2/3. So the first thing I do is find the lowest common multiple, which becomes my lowest common denominator. To do this, I take a look at the highest denominator. Well, in this case, I'm looking at the highest. I have a 12, a 4, an 8, and a 3. So I'm going to begin with the 12, the highest denominator. And I list the multiples of 12, 12 and 24. And right away, I should be thinking, if I go to 4, I know 24 is a multiple of 4. 4, 8, 12, 24. I look at 8, and I also recognize from my basic facts that 24 is a multiple of 8. You see the list here, 8, 16, 24. And my last one is a 3. And also, again, knowing my multiples of 3, I know that 24 is my lowest common multiple, which becomes my new denominator. So you see what's happened here is I've rewritten each of these fractions using a denominator of 24. So I found equivalent fractions for 11/12, 1/4, 7/8, and 2/3 with 24 as my denominator. So in the first case, to go from 12 to 24, I have to multiply by 2. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. So 11/12 becomes the equivalent fraction of 22/24. I look here, how do I go from 4 to a denominator of 24? I multiply by 6. 4 times 6 is 24. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. 1 times 6 becomes 1/4 becomes equivalent to 6/24. I do the same thing here in this example. What do I have to do to 8 to become 24? I multiply it by 3. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. So I have 21/24. And in my last example, I'm multiplying the top and the bottom by 8, and I have 16/24. So now I'm ready. I've made all my equivalent fractions. 22/24, 6/24, 21/24, 16/24. When I have a common denominator, it is easy to compare and order. And I look back at the instructions, and it was from least to greatest. So my original set of fractions, which are here on this top line, in order from least to greatest, will look like this: 1/4, 2/3, 7/8, and 11/12. That's ordering them from least to greatest. Terrific. We're done. And now you know how to compare and order fractions.